Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Breaking the Game Show. I'm your host, Stephen Gillespie. Today, we're going to be talking about the tier two of my NBA player ranking tiers. We got only a couple players in this tier compared to the previous tiers. It's going to be more in-depth conversation about players' performance, expectations for the upcoming season, things of that nature, why I have players where I have them. But before that, I'm going to take a short break. I'll be right back with you after this little 30-second video. All right, everybody. Hey, welcome to the Breaking the Game Show. Like I said, my name is Stephen Gillespie, the host here. I'm going to be flying solo. I've only done this a couple of times since I've been picked up by the Off the Ball Network, but I'm super excited because I have a more intimate layout to discuss with you all. My second tier of NBA players. Yes, we've gone through tiers 4 and 3, and I've had a whole great group of guys come on board willing to kind of pick apart my list for me, give me feedback, and hey, I got thick skin, I can take all of that. That's all well and good. But we are at tier two. And yes, tier two is labeled stars. We're going to be talking about what I consider to be the stars of the NBA. But for those who might have missed the previous two tiers, I'm going to go ahead and go over this and maybe touch on a couple of the more high profile names that fall underneath that tier. So tier 4, and just again to let you guys know, I have more tiers, but I'm starting with the super starters, tier 4, working my way up to tier 1, which are the MVPs of the NBA. Not players that have over the course of their career won MVPs, but players right now who could be in the thick of it when it comes to being nominated for league MVP. But for tier 4, we had a great group of guys come on board and talk about that. It was myself, obviously, and then we had Mo Murphy of the Up in Flames podcast come on, along with Jelani Brown from the What the Game Means to Me podcast, and then our good friend Edgar, who runs the social media account over at Off the Ball Network, the name of the network that I contribute to, and I am the director of operations there. And then tier 3, we had myself, Mo Murphy, and then JP the franchise, another one of our good friends over at Off the Ball Network. So tier 4, super starter. Some of the guys that fall underneath here, right? We've had Rashawn Holmes, a guy who we all say, is an underrated center in today's NBA. We have the Olympian Keldon Johnson, Brooke Lopez, just won an NBA championship. Last year, the rookie Sadiq Bey. I mean, going down this list, the rookie James Wiseman, Bobby Portis, a whole bunch of really awesome names here, and a couple names that I've added since the last time that I've had guests on. I've added Blake Griffin, Jonathan Isaac, who we expect to rebound after, an injury down in Orlando. That team's looking like they're trying to build around a young core there. Dante DiVincenzo, added him. Edgar, shout out to you. You're the one that kind of illuminated the fact that he was probably an undeserving omission. And after thinking on it for a couple weeks, I agree with you. So thank you for that. My guy Marcus Smart out in Boston. Rumors is that he won't be there for very much longer, but I do believe that he falls underneath this category. And even still at his older age, Serge Ibaka. Right. And then we moved to tier 3, which I call demi stars because they're a little better as super starters. And in the right situation, they may give you the facade that they could be the second or best player on a team, but is likely going to be an underachieving team. The way I look at this is that through the lens of a competing NBA organization, these guys would probably be your third or fourth option, right? It's unlikely that they're going to play above their head on a championship team. And some of the guys that I have on here, like a CJ McCollum, John Morant, that was a player that garnered a lot of feedback from the rest of the guys at Off the Ball Network. And right now, I just think that he's a demi star. And again, just to kind of cue you guys in, this is not where I have players for the rest of their NBA career. Obviously, I had Carmelo Anthony as a super starter. And at one point, you could argue that he might have been in the MVP tier, if not the star tier, right? So a couple guys underneath the demi star. Again, John Morant was one of the guys that we mentioned. We have a lot of friends at the Off the Ball Network that are New York Knicks fans. So Julius Randle made them happy when I put them here. Ben Simmons, he's been a guy that's been criticized along with Kristaps Porzingis on what they're not doing in a role that I feel like isn't ideally suited for their talent, right? Which kind of makes them feel like a demi-star. But today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about 19 players in the NBA that fall underneath this tier category. And these are guys that, look, if they're the best player on their team, they're going to look really good. You can still win a lot of games with this. And I would even argue that if you have two of these guys on your team, you have a really good shot at contending for a championship. And with that being said, some of these teams there are some teams that have two of these guys on their roster, and they are in contention perennially for a championship. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with naming off a couple of these guys, right? So, the first guy that I want to talk about is the man that just signed an extension with the Los Angeles Clippers. He's a guy that has been subjected to injury over his time in the NBA, obviously starting in San Antonio, went to Toronto, kind of low key load managed, and we could get into the conversation of, is it a degenerative injury that's keeping him out of contention? Is it just him not having a love for the game? That's what some people seem to consider to be the case. But obviously, Kawhi Leonard is an important player in today's NBA, and you could even argue, and I would even give strong consideration to listening to your argument as to maybe he needs to be in the tier up. But here's the thing: Kawhi Leonard may not even play this year. What does he look like when he comes back after this season? It's going to be hard to say, right? So the Clippers, they're going to have a chance to prove that they can win without having their best player on their team for the rest of the season. It's going to be really interesting to see how that holds up. But Kawhi Leonard, as for now, is basically the tippy top of the spear for being a star in the NBA. He's a guy that's averaging close to 25 points per game, over 6 rebounds per game, 5 assists, shot 51% from the floor, just a tick under 40% from deep, and 88% from the line. And just real quick, good friend of ours, good friend of the show, Michael Casasio, has been writing in. He says, "Nice show. Thank you very much for that, Michael." He said, yes, he is, obviously indicating to the fact that he's a really good player and he's going to be healthy next year. So we'll see how all of that folds out. Thank you so much, Michael, for writing in. But again, back to Kawhi Leonard on this Clippers team, we don't know what that looks like. And again, there's the whole notion of maybe he extended because he knows that his body is not going to be able to hold up for the rest of the season. That remains to be seen. And to be quite honest, there's a logical argument behind that. And we'll see kind of how that unfolds. But, again, we're talking about a guy who can give you 25, 6, and 6 any given night. And it's one of those things to where when you watch him play, you know that he is going to be a game changer on the floor. One thing that I really appreciated about what he showed this past season is that he's willing to be a facilitator on the floor. 5 assists per game is well above his career average. If you look, I'm pulling up the numbers right now. His career averages for assists per game are 2.9. That's insane. Last season, he had 5.2. The year before, 4.9. Never was over 4% or 4 assists per game any season prior to that, right? So we're seeing him become more of a facilitator. And it's one of those things to where as you become older, we've seen all the greats do this to where they could come in, they have a very set skill set. They can build upon that, build upon that, build upon that. But what happens when you get past your 30s, right? Especially when you're a guy that can become susceptible to injuries. You don't want to overexert yourself. Your athleticism is on the decline. You have to think the game a little bit better as opposed to playing it. Michael writes in, good luck with your show. You're one of the best. Michael, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your kind words. Help you enjoy the rest of the show and the rest of your evening, brother. So again, Kawhi Leonard, a guy that you could argue deserves to be the next spot up. And I wouldn't push back too far on that, but played 52 games last season. We know that he's going to miss a good chunk of this season. What does he look like when he comes back? That's going to be something that we have to keep a close eye on. And we're going to get to see a good bit of Paul George, PG-13, in his regular season appearances. So on to the next one. We're going to be talking about Kyrie Irving, and there's a whole lot of different ways that this conversation could go. He's one of the guys that came to Brooklyn. Brooklyn was recruited by Spencer Dinwiddie, who has since signed in Washington now, making Kevin Durant feel like, yeah, Brooklyn is a place that I can sign, and even could convince a James Harden to demand a trade there and Mike D'Antoni to go and coach there underneath brand new coach Steve Nash. So Kyrie Irving, what can we say about Kyrie Irving, right? Uncle Drew himself, he has one of the best skill sets in the NBA as far as handling the rock. But what else can he do? Well, last season, he low key gave you a 50-40-90 year. He shot 50.6% from the floor, 40.2% from deep, 92.2 from the free throw line. And that is one of the statistical lines that no one is talking about. And he gave you 2 more games than Kawhi Leonard. So what makes this man a star? Well, for one, we know that he isn't going to be MVP. We know that that's not going to happen. You're playing with Kevin Durant, a man that people could argue right now is the best player in the entire NBA. And again, if you make that argument, I'll sit back and listen. These are my tiers. So as I discuss these guys, it's not an order of who I think is the best out of all these guys. This is just simply the order that I have evaluated the talent, right? So when I list Kawhi Leonard and Kyrie Irving, I don't think that Kyrie Irving is the second best player of these guys that I've evaluated, right? It's just the order in which I've done so. So Kyrie Irving, again, gave you 27 points last season, almost 5 rebounds and 6 assists. This is a guy that people will call a ball hog, will say so many different things, but 6 assists per game as oftentimes the second, and then again, maybe even your third best option. Last season was his third best season when it comes to assist averages, right? And this is a guy that gets criticized for his defense. He gave you over a steal and almost a full block per game, right? So, and then again, you could come back at me and say, "Hey, Steven, look, stats are nice, but I watched the film." Well, again, if you've heard me talk about stats, obviously I watch the games, right? But if you hear me talk about stats, stats tell the story of what happened in the game for the most part. Now, obviously, there's some gray areas, some ambiguity, things of that nature. But overall, stats are nothing to be afraid of, right? When you read these numbers. So Kyrie Irving, when he's in the game, and again, he played 54 games, started all 54 of them, which was 34 better than the season prior. So hopefully coming into next season, we get to see a little bit more of Kyrie Irving. But we know that the Nets loaded up at the point guard spot when they signed, Patty Mills coming over from San Antonio. Hopefully he plays like he did in the Olympics, which would be crazy, ridiculous, good for Brooklyn. And then they also got one of the biggest steals in the draft when they took Cam Thomas, who we just have seen is putting up 30-point games in summer league right now. So the rich are getting richer. They're drafting well. They're taking their free agency very seriously. And they have a star, they have a star in Kyrie Irving. Let's transition now to talking about a guy who just got done making his first ever finals appearance at the ripe young age of 25 years old. Excuse me real quick while I take a drink. Yes, Devin Booker. We're going to talk about Devin Booker here. Now, this is a guy who's putting up a whole lot of big numbers. And for a guy who is dubbed to be a shooter, shot 34% from deep. Now, I've recently had conversations with other people, like say a Dennis Schroeder, who shot roughly the same amount, but Dennis Schroeder gets the knock that he's not a shooter, but Devin Booker is. Now, what helps Devin Booker is he's one of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA. He did shoot 48% from the floor overall, which is highly effective for especially when you consider the degree of difficulty that this man puts up on a nightly basis. Played 67 games, averaged almost 26 points per, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Now he's playing alongside Chris Paul now, which again is going to be something that kind of skews his numbers a little bit. So yes, Michael who writes in, he says the eye test. Devin Booker possesses the eye test pass, right? This season, right? He's 67 games played. He only shot